So, I just got done watching Captain America 4 Brave New Cap, and I thought it was okay. The thing is, going into this movie, I didn't really know what to expect as far as general reception went, because if you went purely from the first reviews that came out, which is usually the critics' reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, because that's what real moviegoers do, you would think that this was the worst MCU movie ever made. But the thing is, the general audience score was significantly higher and ranging on fairly good, so I didn't really know what to think. And, well, I mean, it's not that bad. It's not amazing, but it's not the worst thing I've ever seen the MCU produce. No, that title's up for grabs between projects like She-Hulk and Eternals. And speaking of Eternals, this is where I'm going to start spoiling things. I'm not even going to try to not talk about what happens in this movie, because if I did, I don't think I'd have much to say. This is such a blasé movie that the most I can say without spoiling is, yeah, you know, it wasn't amazing. No attribute about this movie jumps off the page, so don't expect the best Marvel movie ever, but it's passable enough where it doesn't stand among the worst MCU movies ever made, so you figure out whether you want to see it or not based on that information. I don't know why I even bother worrying about spoilers. Marvel Studios themselves spoiled one of the biggest points of the movie every chance they got, which was Harrison Ford turning into Red Hulk. They spoiled it in the trailers, the posters, the popcorn buckets. Hell, I even saw McDonald's employees saying that they were spoiled when they received the new shipment of Happy Meals and there were Red Hulk toys in the boxes, which is especially hilarious because the movie hadn't even been announced yet at that point because the writer's strike delayed production of the movie. So it made it so that the movie was announced after the call was already made to start giving out the toys. So it's not like Marvel set any sort of standard to not spoil stuff about this movie. And they've done that before. I mean, I remember with No Way Home, they had Tom Holland specifically say,
"Yeah, no spoilers."
But with this movie, it's like they didn't have any faith in Anthony Mackie to sell this movie on his own as Captain America, which I'll talk more about later in this review. So they were like, we know what will get audiences to see this movie. What if we showed the Red Hulk in this trailer? Point is, Marvel's already spoiling this movie, so I don't see why I can't. So click off now if you don't want to be spoiled. Now back to what I was saying before about Eternals, this movie finally does what has been asked by Marvel Twitter since Eternals came out, and that's address this fucking thing that's just sitting in the Indian Ocean like it took you guys long enough. To be honest, I was surprised when I saw that Eternals was being referenced in this. I mean, I expected callbacks to projects like Falcon and Winter Soldier for obvious reasons, and those did exist, but there are callbacks to the Incredible Hulk in this. Yes, that Incredible Hulk movie with Edward Norton. That is how far back we're going that we're referencing a movie with a lead actor that doesn't even play the titular character anymore. I find it extremely funny that Marvel expects us to remember what happened in a movie of theirs that came out 17 years ago and was distributed by an entirely different company than all their other movies. But beyond the interconnected references, let's talk about the plot of the movie, because this movie revolves around Sam's friend from Falcon and Winter Soldier, Isaiah Bradley, the first black super soldier, who in this movie is framed for trying to assassinate the president, Thunderbolt Ross, who's played by Harrison Ford, who took up the role after William Hurt passed away. And as long as we're talking about characters, I said in my Falcon and Winter Soldier review that it was hard for me personally to see Sam Wilson as Captain America after Avengers Endgame because A, he had already established his superhero identity as the Falcon, and B, not many people can embody and capture the character and charisma it takes to play Cap as well as Chris Evans did. However, for some reason, I actually liked Sam a lot better as Cap this time around. I don't know what it was. Anthony Mackie's natural charisma really shone through, and he seemed way more comfortable in a leadership position in his own movie, which in my mind is crucial for the Captain America character, is having those two qualities of charisma and leadership. Maybe it was the fact that in the Falcon show he had to co-lead with Sebastian Stan, and it didn't really give him a chance to take the helm and lead a project all on his own like with this one. And yeah, even with this one, he was still given a partner on screen, but his partner in this movie acts more like an apprentice and doesn't really steal any of the thunder away from him. And speaking of thunder, Harrison Ford playing Thunderbolt Ross was also, in my opinion, a vast improvement from the original portrayal. However, this movie doesn't exactly do a subtle job on who they're trying to make Thaddeus Ross out to be. I'm a wartime president, a guy who gets mad at the press and turns into a raging monster. I'll just leave it at that. I'm pretty sure I've said this before, but I really don't care about political messages being in my media because I'm not someone who wants to spend all their time trying to get mad at things, especially when it comes to something like this where we have a black representative for America fighting for the country's political interests. I feel like something like that is almost inherently political. I'm just critical when political messages are put in that aren't even trying to be subtle. However, there is one thing with Thunderbolt Ross that I want to talk about later in this review, and unsurprisingly, the guy who played Isaiah Bradley delivered one of the best performances of the movie. You really feel sympathetic for him when you see him being framed for a crime he didn't commit and see him being faced with the idea of returning to jail, given his past with being locked up for so many years despite fighting for the country. He was one of the best parts of The Falcon Show, he's one of the best parts of this movie, and it really shouldn't be surprising that I liked his performance. But going back to what I was saying about Isaiah Bradley being framed for President Thunderbolt's being framed for his attempted assassination. Now, I didn't think this was a bad narrative to run with. I thought it actually worked well until about 2/3 of the way through the movie where it didn't. See, because the movie starts off with this big action sequence, which was also so predictable. Like, I was driving to the theater and I thought to myself, I bet this movie is going to open up with a big action fight scene to get our blood pumping, and sure enough, I was right. If there's one thing that the MCU still does really well, it's have very formulaic movie structures. But regardless, after the opening action scene, we get to the Isaiah stuff almost immediately afterwards, and I thought this would be the main conflict of the movie, would be Sam trying to clear Isaiah's name and prove he didn't do it, but this movie does it in such a weird way because Isaiah's name eventually does get cleared, but his name gets cleared about 2/3 of the way through the movie, and even then, it's not like he gets released or anything from jail. No, they keep his ass in there for the rest of the movie because our heroes are too busy with this other shit, until the very end when he's allowed to walk free. Like, at a certain point, everyone knows he's innocent, and yet they still have him sit in prison until the end of the movie.
Hey, that's fucked up.
And when it comes to the other shit in this movie, a lot of that wasn't done very well at all either. The other main conflict stems from Samuel Stearns, who has now fully become the leader character from the comics, and he wants revenge against President Ross for lying to him about granting him a pardon for his crimes. And this isn't a bad motivation, but there's something about the leader in this movie that's not that intimidating or convincing. Maybe it's the fact that we haven't seen him in almost 2 decades, and he hasn't really been built up in that time, so we have no reason to care for him in this movie. Maybe it's the fact that he's this silly-looking broccoli head monstrosity that makes it hard to take him seriously. And I gotta talk about how this movie looks aesthetically for a sec, because even though I've seen worse things in the MCU before, there were still certain points in this movie where the CGI looked really shoddy. Like during that opening fight scene I mentioned where Sam opens the wings in his suit, it was just the fakest looking shit I've ever seen. Or at the end, where they end up at this cherry blossom garden, and they weren't even trying to hide the green screen at certain points. I actually expected the Red Hulk to look way worse for this reason, and I feel like now's as good a time as any to start talking about the third main conflict of this movie surrounding Harrison Ford and his character Thunderbolt Ross trying to fight off his transformation into Red Hulk. Now, if it was not for all the promotion spoiling this major plot point, I think it actually could have been a cool thing to witness in the theater for the first time. But because it was spoiled, the big reveal scene and all the scenes beforehand hinting at the scene where he finally transforms all feel a bit muted and lacking in any sort of real impact because we know what's going to happen. But yes, Red Hulk shows up at the end of the movie, as is usually the case with most Marvel movies, is the big CGI monster battle in the third act, which in this instance is actually more of a problem than normal as far as pacing goes, because before he shows up, the main conflict with the leader is resolved, and it almost feels like the movie should be about over. But you kind of know that the movie can't be over yet because we still haven't seen the Red Hulk. So that makes it so that we know there's still more to the movie, despite it feeling like it should be over. Which means this movie officially feels too long, even if it is one of the shortest Marvel movies. Also, the moment when he transforms and the subsequent fight that takes place where government agents start firing at the Red Hulk and eventually Sam Wilson fights him, logically doesn't make sense. And this is something that me and my friend immediately noticed and talked about when the credits started rolling, was the fact that, wait, he's a Hulk, so theoretically people already know that bullets don't affect him if Mark Ruffalo's time as the Hulk was any indication. Also, are we going to ignore the fact that the government agents are shooting at the president? You know, the guy they work for and are supposed to protect? The best part is this movie made a point earlier about optics where President Ross was like, Sam, we can't have you trying to clear Isaiah's name. You know what the optics of that would be? Captain America trying to help the man who tried to assassinate the President of the United States? And then you get a scene like this, where we're at a publicly broadcasted press conference and government agents are trying to kill the President. But nevertheless, we get the final battle between Captain America and Red Hulk, and it eventually leads to this cherry blossom garden. And when we got here, I visibly rolled my eyes, because they made a point before about the main motivation for President Ross doing what he does in this movie was him trying to do right by his estranged daughter. And the scene plays out like they're trying to make him out to be a sympathetic character, when historically, throughout the 10 years we've known him, he's shown to be anything but that. But now in this movie, all of a sudden, we're supposed to feel for him and relate to him? You can't just tell us that President Ross is this kindly old man who's trying to reconnect with his daughter and give us no evidence or scenes beforehand in this movie or any other movie that help justify this new characterization you're giving him. This is like some of the laziest writing you could do. Oh, I hope one day my daughter and I will be able to take a walk through the cherry blossom garden like we used to. And maybe after that we could go for an ice cream cone? What the fuck, man? And of course, this movie has to end with Marvel teasing more of this multiverse stuff when they have the leader talking about how Sam better get ready for these guys from other worlds. To be honest, I'm surprised they're still trying to go forward with this multiverse stuff when they've been doing it since the end of the Infinity Saga and the beginning of Phase 4, and it's effectively killed any goodwill and momentum they had from Endgame. So who knows what the future is going to look like for this multiverse saga, but I personally have some guesses. I'm guessing that one of these threats from other worlds is going to be Robert Downey Jr., who is in another world as Doctor Doom, and I'm guessing that Anthony Mackie's Captain America will lead a new version of the Avengers to combat him. And when it comes to Anthony Mackie being Captain America in the future, I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about how it seemed like Marvel didn't have faith in him to sell this movie on his own. And after seeing the returns on this movie, you can kind of see why they felt that way. I mean, I knew it was bad when I went to see this movie and the theater was damn near empty. I'm not even saying it's Mackie's fault. I just think we've gotten to a point in the MCU where Marvel can't really use its reputation anymore to coast on some of these movies with less popular superheroes and less popular lead actors. Because let's be honest, the level of charisma and star power you could get from guys like Downey or Evans to make up for a bad movie is not as comparable to the level of charisma and star power we have from most of our MCU heroes today, and it's certainly not enough to make up for when they're in subpar to bad movies. And that's the other thing, is that I don't think audiences tolerate bad or mid superhero movies anymore, especially after seeing the movies the MCU could make towards the end of the Infinity Saga. I think we've gotten to a point where if a project doesn't feature a superhero that is universally loved or doesn't have some sort of good precedent behind it, like with Deadpool and Daredevil, I'm going to be doing a full review and reaction of the new season, by the way, audiences just won't give it a shot. And like I said, that's not really the fault of guys like Anthony Mackie, which sucks because when you see what he says about how he wants to continue to play Captain America for the next decade like Chris Evans did, and then you see how this movie does, it makes you wonder how many more solo movies he'll get or how prominently he'll be featured going forward. But regardless, when it comes to this movie, I think I'm going to wrap this review up and give Captain America 4 New World Order a 6 out of 10.